I feel so far away.
We on?
Hello.
I'm pretty sure.
All right, I hear some nods. That's great. My name is Jim Stokely, president of the Wilma Diamond Legacy. We're the co-sponsor of this debate series with the Asheville High Speech and Debate Program. We've had a wonderful time with these three debates. First one on race relations in the Asheville area, the second one on organic food and eat local, and tonight, and we know what this one's about. The Wilma Diamond Legacy is proud to put on these debates as a demonstration of one of Wilma Diamond's core values, the power of the spoken word. We organized the Legacy to put on programs in the Asheville area to sustain her actually three core values: environmental integrity, social justice, and the power of the written and spoken word. So you're seeing demonstrated in these three debates both the power of the spoken word, some elements of social justice, and elements of environmental integrity. So we feel they have been in the Legacy's wheelhouse, and we're just proud to partner with the speech and debate program to put these on. Please look at the brochure inserted in your program. Consider a donation to the Legacy. Your donations will determine whether we can continue to put on such programs in the future. We direct your attention to my left, to your right. You may be expecting John Boyle. John just got a whole lot prettier.
I liked it, Jim. Good.
Yeah.
There you go. I tell lame jokes, so they I try to manage their expectations. Casey Blake is the community engagement editor and is John's, as you know, John's colleague in his Answer Man and Answer Woman columns, and it's her inaugural event, and we're just glad to have her here. So thanks, Casey. And before we give it over to Casey as the moderator of tonight, I'd like to introduce what I called her last time the best student liaison that anyone could ever have. She and Dee Williams and I were talking, and I said, you know how in any event there's actually somebody behind the curtain who actually does something? This person is that person, and her name is Chloe Dennison. So, Chloe.
Thank you everyone for coming to the third and final debate of our series. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Chloe Dennison, a member of the student leadership team of the Asheville High School speech and debate team. Structured debate on the modern issues of the time is an essential part of any functional democracy. At the high school, we try and teach our students to do just this, as well as being open to all perspectives on the issue. Our goal throughout this series is that you, the audience, have learned to do this as well. So please join me in welcoming our moderator for today's debate, Ms. Casey Blake.
These guys are so smart. All right, can everybody hear me? Comfortable volume? Okay, great. All right, well, I'm just going to introduce our debaters tonight, and then we're going to get right into it. So starting to my right here, your left, we have Dee Williams, an Asheville native and activist here in Asheville. And she is also the first African-American valedictorian to graduate from Asheville High School. Now we also have Ben Scales, an attorney who has lived in Asheville for 14 years, an activist and musician. Ben Scales. Side tonight. On the con side, we have Sheriff Van Duncan, who needs no introduction. He is currently serving his third term as Sheriff of Buncombe County. And finally, for the con side, we have Lindsay Carver-Stockman, who is the Buncombe County Substance Abuse Prevention Coordinator, as well as the coordinator for the Partnership for Substance Free Youth in Buncombe County. Did I get all those right?
Yes, ma'am.
first pro-constructive speech, and that will be Ben Scales. Mr. Scales, come on up.
Thank you. The current policy of absolute prohibition of marijuana that we have in the state of North Carolina and under federal law is a complete and abject failure by any measure. According to Harvard law professor Jeffrey Myron, the price for maintaining this prohibition is $20 billion per year. That figure comes from adding the enforcement and incarceration costs to the tax revenue that would be derived from regulating marijuana like we do alcohol and tobacco. But aside from that $20 billion, let's look at some of the human costs of the prohibition. There are over 750,000 marijuana arrests in this country every year, and over 80% of those are for simple possession only. Our country now locks up more people than any country in the history of the world. We have less than 5% of the world's population and nearly 25% of the world's prisoners. And it gets worse. African Americans are nearly 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than whites. In New York City last year, only 8% of those arrested were white, while 51% were black. In Charlotte, North Carolina, which is about a third African American, 80% of marijuana possession arrests are of African Americans. At this point, I want to make something perfectly clear. Although the evidence shows that the marijuana prohibition is enforced primarily against people of color, and as Ms. Williams will point out, the marijuana prohibition itself was enacted for purely racist reasons. We are not arguing, and we expressly disavow any notion that our opponents are racist. What we are saying is that the policy that they say should continue, the status quo, is racist in both its origins and its application. Which brings me to the next point I want to make. One of the biggest costs of the marijuana prohibition is the breakdown of trust and respect that people have for the law and law enforcement in particular. That has to stop. We need to restore the trust and faith in the hardworking men and women who put their lives on the line daily to keep us safe. I think a policy change along the lines of the proposed resolution will go a long way toward doing just that. Now, maybe this war on marijuana would be worth these tremendous social costs and financial costs if it actually kept marijuana off the streets and out of the hands of our kids, but we know that's not the case. Marijuana is as easy to get now as it always has been, no ID required. Fortunately, the policy change for which we argue today has already been enacted in 4 states in the District of Columbia, and we're seeing tremendous benefits. In Colorado, for instance, the industry has created 10,000 new jobs in the first year. Over 1,000 new jobs are being added each month. Taxes and fees for marijuana are already exceeding $150 million a year, over triple the amount collected from alcohol taxes. There have already been 3 high schools and 2 elementary schools built purely from marijuana tax revenue. But all the benefits have not just been financial. The rate of violent crime has fallen 5.2%, property crime has decreased 9%, prescription painkiller deaths are down 25%, arrests for all drugs, including marijuana, are down 23%. It's clear that ending the marijuana prohibition is actually helping solve the drug problem. Now, I anticipate that our opponents will argue, what about the children? Well, guess what? Teen use in Colorado has not increased at all. In fact, studies show that marijuana use among American high school students is significantly lower now than it was 15 years ago. The proverbial sky is not falling after all. The most recent polls show that 58% of Americans favor legalization along the lines that's supported by this resolution. When legalization is on the ballot, it wins by comfortable margins. Pot is more popular than any politician. Legalization is inevitable, and I, for one, am proud to be on the right side of history.
Tonight, we are here to debate the topic of marijuana should be legalized in the United States and regulated similarly to alcohol and tobacco. What I would like to say to you all as our audience and our community members is that marijuana is a hot topic right now across our country. That being said, there's a lot of gray area within this topic. This is not as simple as a black and white topic or issue. I am here tonight to give the facts about the research that has been done thus far on marijuana and to give information and statistics, on how we in Buncombe County are not effective in regulating alcohol or tobacco. Therefore, legalizing and regulating a drug that we are still researching and learning about is not in the best interest within our community. Out of the 85,776 households within Buncombe County, 27.5 of those have children under the age of 18 living at home. Now, some statistics to address our opponents. Within Buncombe County, between 2004 and 2011, 15% of tobacco outlets sold to minors. In 2012, we had 33.3% of stores surveyed fail and sell to minors. In 2013, we dropped to 17.5% of those stores sold to minors. Now in 2015, we are up to 32.5 stores selling to minors. We have not been effective. A survey by the Bureau of Justice statistics showed that only 0.7 of all of our state inmates were behind bars for marijuana possession only. 1/10 of all state prisoners were marijuana possession offenders with no prior sentences. Within Colorado, there have been 2 deaths recently, one of a minor for use of recreational marijuana. The other was an underage college student who jumped to her death after eating a marijuana cookie. The number of parents in Colorado calling for poison control hotline to report their kids have consumed marijuana has risen significantly. Marijuana edibles and marijuana vaporizers have been found within middle and high schools. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Coughlin. All right, and now we'll have crossfire before the first testimony. So, women?
Okay.
You want one of these?
No, keep those. All right, we're gonna have crossfire between our first 2 speakers. Okay. All right.
Do we do it from here?
You can remain seated.
Okay.
So you may ask each other questions.
Okay.
Starting with okay.
Sure. The question I would have is, you say that marijuana is, we don't know enough about it yet, but do you know that there's been over 20,000 studies done on marijuana in the last 20 years, and that it's probably the most studied plant on the planet?
That's only been within the last 20 years, though, so we haven't had any research from the people that grew up in the 50s, the 60s to now that are still consuming. The marijuana of today is not the same marijuana that was back in the 50s and 60s. This is a new marijuana with concentrations of THC, that are through the roof.
And the THC is a non-lethal, non-addictive substance that you cannot overdose on.
You consider a substance you can't overdose on one that is linked to psychosis and people dropping to their deaths and committing suicide?
Nobody is dropping to their deaths and nobody's committing suicide.
They are.
When you compare it to what would happen if you drank too much alcohol, it's a non-issue. You might not feel good for a little while, but you're not going to die. And alcohol, which is legal, kills 480,000 people a year. What you had to do to come up with these 2 deaths was to extrapolate it out into something that is not what happened. You blame these deaths on the edibles, but there's not any direct correlation to that. The other thing you're talking about with the psychosis you're talking about is pure correlation. There's no causation. If we've studied this plant for so long, if there was really something bad about it, if there was something evil, if there was some reason to keep it illegal, we would have found it by now. But more importantly, the reason why marijuana was made illegal in the first place was not because of any of these things that you're saying. It was made illegal for racist reasons. It was made illegal because we wanted to keep black and brown people under our thumbs. And for that reason, everything that's come out after that has been to try to justify that prohibition, but they've never even been able to come close.
Well, what I would say to that is, we didn't know a lot about tobacco when it got legalized, and now, 50, 60 years later, they were finding studies that said, no, we can't smoke on airplanes now. Now, pregnant mothers should not smoke. So 20 years of research, to me, is not enough. And when we go to alcohol, I would say the human brain is still developing until you're 25 years old. So in my opinion, no substance should be legal for anybody until minimum 25 years of age to purchase.
Okay, so what you're advocating for
We're at time.
is what you're advocating for is, I'm sorry.
I'm afraid we're at time. Thank you. All right, and we are now going to have rebuttals. Can everyone hear me? Yes. With the voice? Awesome. All right, let's hear rebuttals, and we will start with D. Williams on the pro side.
Thank you. One of the things that I would say is that history needs to be talked about in terms of how all of this happened, how it began. As you know, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution freed slaves. There is one clause in there that says that the only time it is allowed involuntary servitude is if one commits a crime. And so that was the beginning of the penal institution as we know it. It was against the law to be a vagrant or either to be homeless, and most of the people who were black who were freed were both things, homeless and unemployed. So there were the beginnings of the penal system. And eventually the black codes were instituted to enforce this imprisonment and this involuntary servitude. So that's where the prison system began. And then from there, the Marijuana Tax Act of 1930, led by one Henry Anslinger, who reigned as the first drug czar from 1930 until 1962. His proof consisted of hysteria about it causing insanity. And I'm quoting right now from the report. Lewd behavior, and that it was the drug of choice used by Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and other people of color, which caused them to compose jazz and, quote, swing music, and caused white women to want to have sexual relations with Negroes. This is his own quotation. The states, particularly the southern ones, created sentences for possession. For example, in Louisiana, it spanned sentences from 5 to 99 years. The war on drugs, as put forth by Richard Nixon, disregarded the findings of the Schaefer Commission. Marijuana was studied intensively. The Schaefer Commission, and the recommendation from all the studies of the Schaefer Commission was that marijuana be decriminalized. So you asked me what happened. Now, we just found out last month from an article in Harper's Magazine from the diaries of John Ehrlichman, who was Nixon's chief domestic policy advisor. And I'm quoting him right now from that article from his diary that his family agreed to release. Quote, "You want to know what this was really all about?" Ehrlichman, who died in 1999, said, referring to Nixon's declaration of the war on drugs. "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities, and they had. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did, according to the March 2016 edition of Harper's Magazine. The truth is that the outrage has been muted in the black community and the white community. It also has been muted. Given how successful the war on drugs has been in accomplishing its mission and destabilizing black lives, the deathly silence at its revelation raises the legitimate question, do black lives really matter in these United States of America? Let's see.
We will now hear from Sheriff Van Duncan.
Good evening. I think a famous philosopher once said, never let the things that matter most be determined by the things that matter least. And it's not that the things that matter least don't matter, they are just of a lesser importance. And I think our opponents over here tonight have some very good points. Now, let's focus on what the debate's about, because if we were talking about looking at the criminal justice system, doing things to make it more effective, less punitive towards racial minorities and those kind of things, I might be sitting over here on the other side of the table, but that's not what the debate's about. The debate is about, do we legalize marijuana? And not talking about it from a historical perspective, but from a perspective going forward, is that going to leave us in a better place? And my position on it is it is not. I would argue that stronger today than I would have 2 years ago. And the reason why is because this epidemic of addiction that we're seeing that basically results in opioid addiction that is killing a lot of our kids and a lot of the people in our community. Now, not everybody that smokes marijuana winds up being addicted to a stronger substance. As a matter of fact, it's a small percentage. But when you look at the percentage of the individuals who wind up addicted to a deadly, harder narcotic, almost all started with marijuana or alcohol. So do we leave ourselves in a better place by legalizing a substance that we know that when we do, that it's going to lead to more accessibility, more experimentation, and more young people who are under the age, as Lindsay said, of 25 years of age before the brain is fully formed that get on that road to addiction. Now, what I would do is appeal to you. We can talk about statistics in a lot of different ways. But what I would say is because Ben's going to have statistics, we're going to have statistics, Lindsay's going to have statistics, Dee's going to have statistics. How do we fact check those things? We really can't. But what I can tell you is all the medical experts agree we do not fully comprehend what marijuana does to the brain. We know it does affect short-term and long-term memory. We know that when kids under the age of 16 start habitually smoking marijuana, 1 in 6 generally become or move on to a harder drug. They get on that road of addiction. Now, what I would appeal to is the high schoolers and the parents sitting in the audience. I would venture to say that almost all of you know families who have had their world turned upside down by a family member who has fallen victim to addiction. And once that road of addiction is embarked upon, trying to help that person, trying to move that person out of that is extremely hard to do. Another reason why I think legalization is a bad idea, it's much in the way that we talked about prescription drugs. If the doctor gives it to you, then it must be safe and it must be okay. If we legalize marijuana, you're going to have younger kids who are very able to become addicted to that substance, be exposed to it. And they're going to say, probably not any harm here, it's a legal substance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. So we will now have Crossfire, our second set of speakers. Ms. Williams and Sheriff Duncan can exchange questions, and then that will be
As to the
3 minutes.
quotations and fact-checking, the Institute of Medicine, which is the health arm of the National Academy of Sciences, said in a 1999 study that 32% of tobacco users became dependent, as do 23% of heroin users, 17% of cocaine users, and 15% of alcohol drinkers. But only 9% of marijuana users developed a dependence. The closest correlation was caffeine, and both are at 9% dependency rate. Now, it's a Schedule I drug. Marijuana is right up there with the opioids and the rest of those. What is so alarming about it is that to be a Schedule I drug, 3 things, and this is by the federal government. It has no medicinal use. We know marijuana is prescribed. I believe Sheriff Duncan made a statement about it not being prescribed, has no medicinal use. It does, and it is being prescribed. The high potential for abuse, I just gave you those numbers from the National Academy.
And Ms. Williams, if we can direct questions, we want to give the Sheriff a chance to
Sure. And then
a brief question.
to the Sheriff?
Yes.
Okay. The lack of an acceptable safety for recreational use. There are states now, including the District of Columbia, who do allow it for recreational use. And then I guess the other thing too.
Why don't we give Sheriff Duncan a chance to speak, because I think we've only got about 1 minute left.
Okay.
Sheriff Duncan, if you'd like to-
Well, what I would say is North Carolina is moving towards some decriminalization of minor amounts of marijuana. It's also moving towards some medicinal use of marijuana, and marinol and the oils. And I don't think anybody debates that it does have some medical purpose and some medical use. But what I would say is I don't think any doctor is going to prescribe you to smoke marijuana as a treatment, because there's no ingesting of a burning substance that a doctor is going to prescribe to an individual. It'll be prescribed in a different way. And I didn't hear, I'm not sure that I heard another question.
Yes, there are states where doctors do prescribe it for medicinal purposes. There are only about 23 of those right now, as a matter of fact.
Is you talking about in pill form or smoking?
No, just the smoke, not ingestion at all. They
Okay.
prescribe it for everything from cancer to, I guess, sleep apnea.
Right. Well, I think you can find, if you look hard enough, a doctor that will prescribe a lot of things that aren't accepted by the mainstream of the medical community. I don't know any mainstream medical doctor that would prescribe marijuana to be burned as a way to ingest it.
Maybe not in North Carolina yet, but as you say, it is making its way here. Based on the research, marijuana has been studied to death, and as I said, 9% correlation with caffeine. And the others, it's improperly placed as a Schedule I drug. The Schaefer Commission did recommend
Ms. Williams, we're
decriminalization.
at time. Do you want to finish that thought? Thank you. All right, and we're now going to move on to summary speeches. And we are going to give 1 minute of prep time to each of our teams, so you can take 1 minute now to prepare your summary speeches.
And I think your stuff around the situations where it has caused, and in some cases caused psychosis. And I mean, they won't debate that, but that's what our research says. And you have had this from medicals. So I think we can't, they have their sources, we have ours. Social cost. Social cost.
So we will start our summary speeches now with our co-side. Yes.
So to summarize our position, what we're saying is the status quo is not working. It hasn't worked. And to borrow from my opponent's methodology there, I would say that if it did, I would be sitting on that side. But what we're finding is that marijuana is more prevalent now than it ever has been. And addiction rates for marijuana are lower than they ever have been. There's been more and more people. In 1969, 84% of the population opposed marijuana. Now, 58% support legalization. This sea change in opinion has come about as the lies and the propaganda of reefer madness have started to fade. And everything I've heard in opposition to changing the status quo has been to try to stoke the fears. What's going to happen to the children? What's going to happen to people that can't handle these higher dosage edibles? But all those things can be handled through a regulatory scheme. What we're not saying, we're not advocating the use of marijuana. What we're saying is the current use, the current way it's being controlled is not working. Prohibition is the least effective form of control. We don't know what's going into the marijuana. We don't know what's going into the edibles unless the government can be regulating this type of stuff. And they can regulate the packaging, they can regulate that marketing and the advertising, And all these things can go together to make sure that we have a policy that is effective at controlling this plant. This plant has been evolving alongside humans for centuries. It's not going anywhere. The marijuana prohibition as it currently exists only is effective. Its only goal has to be the eradication of the plant from the planet. Does anybody really think that's going to happen? Does anybody think we're doing anything but just continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? Does anybody think that marijuana usage rates are going to all of a sudden go down? No. What we need to come to grips with is that marijuana is here to stay, and how are we going to control it? Because banning it completely for no purpose whatsoever is not working. The status quo has failed. It's time to move in a rational direction. Thank you.
And summary from Ms. Stockman for the concept.
To summarize, I'd like to address some of Mr. Scales' questions, or if they were questions. According to the addiction results, 1 in 11 adults and 1 in 6 youth who try marijuana will become addicted over their lifetime. Youth are more likely to become addicted because their brains are still developing. Again, your brains are developing until the age of 25 years of age. Similar to big tobacco, already private holding groups and financiers have raised millions of startup dollars to promote businesses that will sell marijuana and marijuana-related merchandise. Cannabis food, candy, and candy is already being marketed to our children and already responsible for a growing number of marijuana-related ER visits. Edibles with names such as ring pots and Pop-Tarts are inspired by favorite candies that children like, such as ring pops and Pop-Tarts. A New Zealand study recently stated that only 2% of 14 to 21-year-olds who use cannabis gain a university degree. 52% of their 21 to 25-year-olds who have used cannabis are unemployed.
Thank you, Ms. Stockman. So we will now have grand crossfire, in which all 4 of our speakers may ask questions of one another. A reminder, we want these questions to be very brief so that you can give your opponent a chance to respond, and that they can then return.
Yes, sir. Ms. Carver-Stockman, you talk about addiction to marijuana. What's the withdrawal like from addiction to marijuana?
I can't speak directly to the withdrawal. I'd have to ask somebody who was going through withdrawal, but I can tell you that more young people are in current recovery programs for marijuana abuse than any other program.
But don't most of those people get put there because they get caught with the marijuana and not because they have a problem with it?
Not all of them. A lot of people that are in recovery are because they choose that they no longer want to be addicted to that substance.
But you would agree with me, wouldn't you, that addiction to a prescription pill or an opioid is much worse than addiction to marijuana?
I wouldn't agree.
There's a withdrawal that comes from alcohol addiction and opioid addiction that doesn't exist with marijuana.
I can't say I agree with you on that. I haven't seen anybody withdraw personally from that substance.
Can we both answer questions asked to the group?
Absolutely.
I can tell you that I have. And I can also tell you in the documentation that we've looked at that some of the symptoms are sleeplessness, depression, and paranoia. Now, I would agree with you that the physical withdrawal from an opioid is much worse. Probably the physical withdrawal from alcohol is the most dangerous. But there are physical symptoms and problems in withdrawing from marijuana.
And you think that justifies keeping it away from responsible adults?
Well, once again, I go to that what matters most, and as we look at the social cost of marijuana, if you look at the social cost in Colorado with what they're estimating now for the basically the unintended cost, some of the things around that are that you have people that are going into treatment. You also have people who are not able to maintain a job. Just because it's legal doesn't mean that absolves them from passing a drug test from their employer. So you're having a lot of issues and a lot of problems with people maintaining a job. And also, I think Lindsay had some statistics there around homelessness. I don't know that we presented and put those out there, but one of the things that Colorado is experiencing is a high rate of homelessness that has increased quite a bit.
It sounds like if you're talking about homelessness, that's a symptomatic of poverty. So I don't think we should take poverty. There's some sociological issues also that may be involved with what you're talking about. When I look at it, if we're going to hit the bottom line, it looks like the federal government has spent $15 billion in 2010 on the war on drugs. And would you say that it's been effective, Sheriff?
No, ma'am, I would not.
Okay, so the definition
we're,
of insanity is to...
If we're sitting here arguing about whether there needs to be changes and where our focus needs to go, and in my opinion, it needs to shift more from intervention and enforcement to prevention, because we know that's where there's the best bang for the buck. I think we all agree with that. If you talk to your hospital, and I was in a discussion with Mission Hospital today, and their biggest concern, there's a lot of dual diagnosis between substance abuse addiction and mental health. And if you talk to any public safety service provider out there, their biggest concerns are how do we maintain